I want to start off by talking to you about our friends on the so-called liberal left. They can't help but be overly enthusiastic, can they? Their dedication is such that they often miss the mark, startling our usually easygoing British public. We all stand united in agreement, for example, that racism is unacceptable, full stop. However, let's also agree that importing America's deeply entrenched issues to our shores in the guise of the Black Lives Matter movement is not only unnecessary, but also divides us. Because we're different and don't wish to import divides from America that have never existed here. Similarly, we all cherish our green and pleasant land here in Britain. We want our rivers to run clean, our air to be pure, and our trees standing tall, don't we? But does that mean we need to turn our lives upside down for an environmental cause steered by a zealous Greta-inspired cult? Do we need to sacrifice our cars, our humble yearly holiday, or the joy of a steak dinner in our country contributing a mere 1% of global CO2? Something just doesn't add up for me here. And let's talk about personal freedom. You want to dress in feathers and call yourself Lord Gobbledygook? You go right ahead. It's your right in a country like ours. Sleep with any consenting adult that'll have you. Live your life in peace and security, but don't encroach on the rights of others. There's a line, and it's crossed when we jeopardise women's safe spaces, meddle with sports, and risk our children's understanding of their own identity, all under the banner of a new age gender ideology. Costa Coffee, I'm very much looking at you and your questionable moral choices. And on a more sombre note, who among us doesn't want our loved ones to depart this world with dignity and peace? But look across the Atlantic, and our Canadian cousins have shown us the dangers of a hasty implementation of assisted dying. The pandemic prince and king of whackery and wokery, Justin Trudeau, well, he's inadvertently sounded an alarm bell to the Western world. Canada's Liberal government introduced the Assistance in Dying, or MAID, in 2016. Now, this MAID, or MAID, isn't your friendly housemaid, but more akin to a grim reaper for those suffering from severe mental health issues. You see, I say that actually this makes clear we must tread carefully, as our MPs gather evidence from around the world to assess the impact of assisted suicide. We should remember our recent mantra, protect the NHS. Do you remember that one? But how far might that idea be stretched? How many might be coerced or simply convinced to end their lives prematurely in order to ease the strain on the NHS, to avoid becoming a burden to their families, or to escape the torment of mental health issues? Canadian voices like Lisa Powley's, a woman in her 40s, by the way, who's battled anorexia since she was 8 years old, well, she's been demanding the right to assisted suicide in Canada. And I fear that there are parallels here to the trans debate, where children's desires for irreversible medical procedures are hastily affirmed. Could we see a similar rush to validate requests for suicide due to mental health diagnoses here at home? A Canadian Army veteran who competed in the Paralympics in 2016 told a government committee that she was offered euthanasia when she asked for a stairlift to be installed in her home. Now, our veterans already receive worse access to housing than illegal migrants arriving here. How many may be offered a needle over a waiting list for necessities? We have to ask ourselves what might be the implications for the vulnerable among us. You know, my mother, during the pandemic, held my Auntie Sharon's hand as she passed away from sepsis during the first lockdown. Now, her death was a painful reminder of the shortfalls in our social care system. But had assisted suicide been an option, could Sharon, who had spina bifida and was wheelchair-bound, have been pressured into choosing an early exit to alleviate perceived burdens upon the state? Imagine this and think seriously. You need social care, you need housing, you're stuck on a waiting list, and suddenly assisted suicide becomes an option. You're struggling financially due to a cost of living crisis? Well, mate, have you considered assisted suicide? You're trapped in the claws of addiction. Life is spiralling out of control. Assisted suicide becomes a disturbingly easy solution. In 2021, over 10,000 people ended their lives by assisted suicide and euthanasia in Canada, an increase of over 32% from the previous year. That's accounting for 3.3% of all deaths in Canada. This is real, and this is here in the West. I don't know about you, but I don't trust the system to get this right. Not by a long shot, I'll tell you that for free. I fear that we're veering too close to a dystopian reality where a Dr. Shipman-esque death by doctor on demand becomes normalised. Let's remember that a life, any life, is worth far more than 2 signatures and a depressed syringe that assisted dying requires under the Canadian law. Our most vulnerable might seem like financial burdens to penny-pinching bureaucrats, but they are much more than that to me, and I imagine you. They are cherished human beings who deserve our protection and support. And this is all despite the Canadian Supreme Court ruling that fears of a slippery slope into homicide were unfounded. Now, I can't help but look at Justin Trudeau's so-called liberal agenda and worry. Is it the future that we want for our country? I think it's time to hit the brakes on this conversation. Britain, we must consider where this path will ultimately lead. And if you ask me, there's precious little that we ought to be following Justin Trudeau in doing.